Tonight it is April 18th, 2015, and I made a really short clip that had nothing to do with the topic that I've been working on for a long time about rape by the United States government and their coordination and planning of rape. But anyway, I need to continue with what I was talking about with regard to the rapes by I mentioned a rape that occurred by Mark, this truck driver that the FBI had go out to meet me in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then I mentioned just a little bit about how that was yet one more of the plans and I guess scenarios or themes that the United States government employees had worked on many times when I was a kid. With the trucks, it was it could have been when I was a lot younger, but I actually remember more of it occurring when I was about middle elementary school age to pre-teenage. And this was a theme that involved a very large number of individuals. And it also occurred in several locations in different semi-trucks in a huge number of different locations. I'm tired because it is nighttime and anyway. So there are also like some rapes that occurred against me, or sexual assaults that occurred in, for example, vans, like the back of vans, like VW vans, utility van styles of vans. There were several incidences of my being assaulted in vans. So, anyway, I was about to say, to this day, I am sort of hesitant to walk past a van with the door slightly ajar, just because, I mean, I can play it off and manage to do that, but it is a little unnerving sometimes, just because of some of the things that happened. You know, someone reaches out, grabs me, hauls me into a van, and then assaults me. And some of the things that happened in, for example, vans didn't seem to be as much U.S. coordinated, because, you know, sometimes if it's a van, it just looks like some random person. They're not necessarily in a marked vehicle, such as a cop car or a federal transport kind of a vehicle, or military. But there were some incidences in vans. There was also an incident or two in military transport vehicles and that kind of thing. But what I'm talking about with the truck, I mean, you would think that, you know, with my talk about, okay, the semi-truck and then, you know, some military transport, like how many vehicles am I talking about, for example, for rapes that were not in, for example, personal cars, as I described, where they were trying to have me, where they had me programmed several times to do something to a man, orally or touching him, while I was usually seated on the passenger side of a car with certain triggers and cues, you know, from a seated position that they wanted me to follow through on. So how you know, these other vehicles, why is it different? Well, I don't know why exactly, but the United States government had a theme for almost all of the rapes that they committed against me. And what they did, I think that they had this theme, and they had specific results and targets and triggers that they were using for specific scenarios, because they were hoping to play those out later against me in a specific way, I guess. And so the semi-trucks was its own thing, basically. It was always a repeat of the same type of abuse in the semi-truck, the same kind of hostage holding and all of that. And yet it involved a very, very large number of individuals. And so when I say how many trucks was this repeated in, I don't know, maybe like 12 to 15 or so. And then, and it could be more than that, actually. And then as to how many incidences were these things occurring in these various semi-trucks. And that number then would go up to like 50 times, literally. I would say about 50 times if you take all of the different semi-trucks into consideration. And some of the individuals who were involved more than one time, but a lot of it had one group, one area, or with one truck kind of an event, a different group with a different situation, but they all were doing the same thing. So somehow they were all coordinated. They all knew about each other in some way, and what the other group was doing, because then they were repeating pretty much exactly what the other group was doing. And then there were a couple of places where I'm not sure what it was. I think it was like trying to tone down my hysteria, because at some point then they wanted to have me not be freaking out anytime I was near a semi-truck. So they tried to do like a lesser amount of abuse and tried to make it like, oh, it's not so bad, and not as big of a deal, and not as bad of abuse, so that I became reacquainted, quote unquote, with being comfortable and not thinking about the danger of being in a semi-truck. Because first the United States government was trying to, quote unquote, program me to accept being raped in a semi-truck, and then they assaulted me multiple times. And then after that, it was like trying to have me forget that it ever happened, so that it would only I would only respond to being raped when I was actually being raped, and I wouldn't necessarily fear getting into a semi-truck anymore, because they would reacquaint me with the semi-truck, have me feel like, oh, it's an okay place to be, I'm not going to get hurt, but they still wanted me to retain all of this reaction and response that they had used against me in the middle of an assault, if that makes any sense. So anyway, so then there were, as I am explaining, a few situations where the group that was involved did have a semi-truck there, and they did sort of maybe do some light, like scary things or kind of touching me, but then they'd back off and they'd joke around, or they'd be nicer, that kind of thing, and not do as much. So then there were these other people who did that, and it was like the toned down people. I mean, I don't exactly even know what they called themselves, but these various groups. But you know, I could say that these people who are the toned down group, it's one of two things. You know, it's either they just didn't feel comfortable fully assaulting me, or basically they fully knew that I was being raped and terrorized, in a truck multiple times, and then their job was to be just kind of like the frosting on the cupcake. You know, they just had to smooth everything over, make sure that I was readjusting basically back to feeling comfortable to be in a semi-truck. They'd do a couple scary things, but they didn't want me to be freaking out every time I was around one. So basically the point was to have me feel comfortable enough to not fear or assume that I would be assaulted just to get into a semi-truck, but that in the event that I was then being assaulted by one of these government men, that I would then flash into my trained response, which was self-defense by being forced to accept rape and pretend like nothing was wrong and we're all friends, and nothing bad happened to me at all. And so I'm really not sure, you know, how each of these groups, how they justify any of this or reconcile it with themselves, but there was a very large number of people who are comfortable with doing all of this to me. And if they've done this to me and they knew that it worked in a certain way, which they did, it wasn't like I was some kind of experiment that had never been worked on before. I know that they've done that to other people. Maybe not a lot of other people, but they've done it to a few other people. And the fact that the United States government is cloning human beings and setting them up to be slaves right from the very start. I mean, they're considered to be government property from the start. Those clones don't have lives. They don't have choices. They don't have rights. This country is breeding them like they're plants. And the country doesn't care about them. They believe they own them because they created them, is how they think of it. We created you, and we created you for our own purposes, and they're not going to let these individuals go. They're not free from the time they're conceived and made into embryos and cloned and all of that. They are basically slaves, and they are not free. So this is this country raising an entire, I mean, who knows how many generations of it, but the country is engaged in slavery, and the country is the largest, quote-unquote, slave master land, or, you know, slave owner. And I don't think enough people are thinking about the long-term effects of this. I don't even think people are thinking about the short-term effects of it. I think that some people just think it's interesting. The people who are really involved in it, I don't think they feel very bad about it. I think they're not clones, so they don't have to worry about it. And the fact is every single citizen should be worried about it, because this is an elite group, and it has gone international that's involved in it. So the people who are elite and want to not be cloned themselves, but want to run this entire thing and think that they're the managers, they're leaving these citizens out of the loop. The citizens do not have power. They will never have weapons, access to weapons, to defend themselves against the things that these countries do to control their clones. And the next thing that you know, it's going to be your kid. And it's going to be your DNA that gets cloned. And it might be in another country, because another country might have access to it in some way, or it might be right here in your own country. So I think that people should be thinking very seriously about things I say, and should not be putting me in mental places any longer. because I'm not nuts.